Hello there, Trailblazers. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be treading some familiar water with what is a round 2 to my first time tackling this subject. I feel like I can make the point better, and so I want to take another swing at it. So without too much more preamble, let's just get right into things, shall we? The overthinking spiral that resulted in this video actually stemmed from Tectone claiming that Silverwolf was the final nail in the coffin of HSR being considered a strategy game. Needless to say, I didn't outright agree with the notion, and would ruminate on it while I relegated myself to the trace material mines in a fit of ritualistic self-harm known as pre-farming. Now, it's been quite a long time since I saw his take, and I'm a little fuzzy on the exact words he used, but I'm even more lazy as it turns out, and trying to find the exact clip to refresh myself fully is beyond me right now. So instead, I'm just going to work based on impressions I got the first time I watched it, and if I'm wrong about anything, I guess I'll be hearing about it in the comments. Now, the way I understood and interpreted his point was that her character design was incompatible with the core game mechanic, specifically the elemental system. If I'm not mistaken, the point was that HSR had a robust combat system that revolved around matching your team to the specific elemental weaknesses of the enemies. Silverwolf, by having the ability to add a weakness to enemies, was a breach of this core principle of design and served as the final marker that this game wouldn't have meaningful strategy. That's my best attempt to interpret my impressions in complete and honest good faith. I apologize for any inaccuracies in his stance, but hopefully, with us all on the same page, at least where I was thinking, let's start breaking things down. In my opinion, I think this argument sounds good on the surface. Making a character that essentially invalidates the core team strategy motivator sounds pretty bad. However, I think that's assuming that this breaks the system. As all things in life, context certainly matters, and I feel like the nuances of Silverwolf's kit are far more of a determining factor here as to her impact on the game. Now, if you'd kindly indulge me in a brief sidebar, any of you guys out there Halo fans, if you have any experience with this FPS game, this concept should make itself clear to you. Should a weapon exist that in one shot be able to kill 4 people? If you said no, then say goodbye to the spanker and the sniper rifle, also the tank. If you said yes, that's probably because you thought something along the lines of, only if it's a power weapon. Now, to add some context, a power weapon in Halo is purposely overpowered as it takes the high time to kill of your Spartan and reduces it to essentially zero. However, not only does this not break the core gameplay, they are actively used to enhance the flow of combat because there is only ever one of a kind on the map, and teams fight over control of these weapons in order to gain advantage. This is just to say that potentially game-breaking design choices can be incorporated into a sandbox without turning it inside out. Bringing this back over to StarRail, your 5 stars are generally your power weapons, and their kits are usually designed to break the conventions of the game. I mean, let's not forget that the first limited character quite literally laughed in the face of the turn-based portion of this game's genre. The cost, however, was fair. It required 1 kill, and you couldn't do it again until you had another turn or used Seela's ultimate. And looking at Silverwolf, I would argue that the purposeful restrictions that we call deficiencies or clunk today are the exact balancing metrics that would allow such an ability to exist in the sandbox. And beyond that, this wasn't even what really gave Silverwolf so much prominence in the early days before we called it Herda support rail. I believe her 53% defense shred and all-type res down were the real X factors at play. This is my hypothesis, given the fact that HP inflation devalues the potency of these debuffs since base resistance and defense can't increase at the same pace. In fact, I don't think they've increased ever. Simply put, when gacha games first begin, the enemies are actually going to be underpowered to accommodate the fact that you're not going to have that many characters at their max potential. This means HP is going to be very low, thus, defense shred will be a much more potent damage amp at the start. And this right here is probably where I'm going to alienate myself from a large portion of the player base. But to tackle this subject, I'm going to talk about some community proposed buffs that I feel would constitute problematic game design and hopefully highlight my main point. Buff number 1, Make Silverwolf's implant be guaranteed to the first character on the team. First thoughts with this one? If you support this, please do not pretend you ever cared about the elemental system. But more than that, tell me you don't like team building without telling me you don't like team building. Okay, but real talk though, getting down to brass tacks. I genuinely believe Silverwolf's RNG on Implant was a good thing at launch and is a good idea in general, but it's hampered and sabotaged by the nature of gacha games and Hoyoverse's refusal to release a properly balanced elemental range of characters. Speaking now in 3.x, that has certainly changed, RIP preservation, but without a steady stream of viable 4 stars and content catered to team archetypes, Silverwolf never really had a spot on any team to begin with. And as much as we love it, Mana Quantum was a cope archetype. Not in its effective viability, more so that it's not actually a team Hoyoverse really tried to establish or nurture. If you ask me, the real value of Silverwolf's RNG should have been dynamic team building where you leverage the enemy and team elements to guarantee you get the weakness you want. In this case, the RNG serves to preserve the elemental system's importance, since trying to brute force it causes you to waste lots of your time and effort. Plus, to be fair, all of those resets count as a loss. Trying to play Gamba with Silverwolf's RNG should have been a self-inflicted punishment, whereas the player should be rewarded for being able to utilize various different teams to enable different characters, whether that be Silverwolf as a break character, your sub DPS, or just getting your main DPS online. However, if you don't have a viable alternative to a 5-star to be second support on that team, you're gonna just drop Silverwolf for a character with more utility or power. The real problem with Silverwolf's implant is that it becomes kinda useless the second busted DPS characters release in the various elements. They render her implant obsolete. Why would you need Wolfie for Fei Xiao when you can just run Pela? Everything will be wind weak anyway, and why have Wolf when you could just get E1 or S1 Topaz? It's the same cost after all. Buff number 2. Increase her defense reduction value. Now you're a little confused, but you got the spirit. Like I mentioned before, the defense stat of enemies doesn't really increase, and that's likely because it can't. To do a bit of quick math, 50% of 500 is 250. If you inflate that defense to 1000, you're right back where you started, and you've weakened the entire roster, even those busted supports. The reason why HP can balloon so high is because your DPS characters are designed to be strong enough to beat them without defense reduction. And as a result, the buffs harmonies provide to attack and damage percent are more valuable. The reason being, unless we are going to jump up to things like 150 to 200% defense reduction, 100% is the maximum value that you can put on. Eventually, HP will outscale the benefits of defense reduction. And that's why I'm positive that Hoyoverse has never increased the defense stat for enemies, because they have never seen it fit to add a defense reduction greater than what Silverwolf provides. Not only that, it would make defense reduction a required inbuilt character aspect at E0S0, not a premium privilege of limited light cones or eidolons. But other than that, you don't really hear about defense inflation now, do you? Jumping back to Silverwolf, I've seen it be said that her Def Shred should be more than only 5% better than that of a 4 stars. Forget that it's actually 13%, 11 if we want to count Payless Eidolons that you should have. But if I'm being honest, isn't it better if they still balance the game off Pela? Otherwise, this is basically arguing against your own best interest. Buff number 3. Wolf should be Blast or AoE. I'll cut to the chase.
One day you will have to answer for your actions, and God may not be so merciful.
Okay, but seriously, I'll keep things simple. This buff just feels lazy and uninspired, but I'm not entirely against it. My initial aversion to this comes from thinking turning a single target character into not a single target character is just an awful way to solve problems when the correct solution should be making them a stronger contender in the single target realm. And I would also argue that implanting 3 weaknesses would be excessive, especially if we're talking about not invalidating the elemental system. However, I would be remiss to not admit that if Silverwolf is going to operate as a proper support, she needs to be able to apply her larger depth shred faster. And so I think it would be just fine if this ability was AoE or blast. But back to my main point with this, I would instead say they should develop more meaningful single target gameplay, whether it be by enemy designs or soft rewards to encourage that approach. Ironically, after hearing those buffs, I think if you applied them, especially at the start, I'd have no disagreement about her wrecking the strategy potential of HSR. If Silverwolf could apply 80% def reduction to the entire field in 1 to 2 turns, implant 3 weaknesses, and they were guaranteed to be the one you wanted, at that rate you might as well pick up a lobotomy if thinking is that hard. Silverwolf does have issues, but those buffs do not address them. The most major one being only having one damage enhancement vector, that being her defense reduction. What else does Silverwolf actually do to increase ally damage? Despite her ability to lower an enemy's resistance by about 33%, only 13% of that actually counts. Silverwolf is the only true weakness implant in the game. Boothill, Firefly, and now Anaxa, they do not implant weaknesses. They bend the toughness bar to their whim. None of them actively overwrite or change elemental resistances, meaning they still have to deal with a damage loss. Silverwolf will reduce the resistance of the implanted weakness by 20%, meaning they are no different from a naturally occurring weakness. Now, her 13% all-type res down. If they are at 0 resistance, results in a 13% damage increase for your allied damage. If not, then you still have a good 7% to 27% resistance. One of your debuffs might actually just be useless. And that is where we get to our first order of business. Raise that all-type res down to 25%. This means the implanted weakness drops by 45%, and your sub DPS, if you choose to have one, will benefit from a Ruan Mei level damage increase. Kafka, a storm is coming and there will be thunder. Cocolia, the eternal freeze may bury you. True stings might feel the breeze, and Yanqing, honestly, fuck you. Just fuck you. Now, the next buff or rework depends on which avenue we take Silverwolf down. Do we make her a DPS debuffer like the recently released Cypher, or do we double down on her debuffing potential? If you chose option A, her base chances to inflict her debuffs need to go up. That way she could wear a crit rate body piece, and at the same time, she converts her crit rate into either effect hit rate or attack, or she can convert her effect hit rate into crit. Either way, Silverwolf does not need Shui Yi build complexity. Next, we address the major traces. Make the inject trace be part of her skill as base kit. This can now be replaced with the crit effect hit rate conversion trace. Side note is a trash trace. Just roll that into the skill again. Now we'll convert the name from side note to side quest. When Silverwolf attacks non-elite or boss type enemies, she deals 30% more damage to them if afflicted with a bug from talent or depth shred from ultimate. The purpose of this buff is so that she can make up more of her value through damage that provides utility more than just chunking boss HP. This makes her a prime attacker for summons or trotters, if Hoyo ever remembers they exist, as well as letting your hunt character focus down the more dangerous threats, cutting down how much they need to target swap. This has the added benefit of allowing you to spend a Silverwolf ultimate in the case that you already have one applied and you don't need to reapply it. You can now use it on a side mob so you can take care of them faster and still have time to build it back up, especially if you run the superior ult spam Silverwolf build. The numbers might need a bit of tweaking, but hopefully get the spirit of the idea for a sub DPS Wolf. If we want to go down the route of increasing her debuff power, I would drop her attack reduction bug and instead replace it with vulnerability. And then we can edit the generate trace, roll that extra bug duration over into the skillet base again, and make it so that Silverwolf has a chance to stack the vulnerability on the enemy every time she attacks, or in this case, hits. To go something like this: copy paste. Silverwolf has a 65% chance to duplicate bug vulnerability if it has 3 or more debuffs. Vulnerability can only duplicate a max of 2 times. However much value that should be, that's for playtesting to decide. Next, replace inject or side note with ether pulse. For every debuff implanted by Silverwolf, increases break damage received by 5% for a max of 15 or 20%. This will give her a natural synergy with break and super break damage and plays into the fact that she enables breaking for your teammates. Seems only fair that you can get rewarded for breaking an enemy that you shouldn't have been able to. This one was given to me by a friend that I feel can fit into her kit as is. This trace will be called Overload. After inflicting debuffs X number of times, Silverwolf will deal an instance of break damage to the enemy and generate break effect quantum entanglement after using ultimate. I really enjoy this idea because it will preserve Break Wolf builds and at the same time encourage her single target nature, while also increasing her DPS contribution, which means her basic attacking is still working towards something rather than just a free skill point or skilling for energy. Silverwolf will be able to proc this trace frequently thanks to her reapplying her bugs. My friend said that teammate debuffs will also go towards this counter, and so that means that playing her with other Nihilities is advantage, playing her without just slows her DPS down a bit. And now the second buff that I personally came up with is implanted weaknesses can still reduce toughness of weakness-locked enemies to really play into that hacker angle a bit more. This would just mean that enhanced forms like the Soulglad Monkey, the Arumaton, or, for example, Yanqing Complete no longer stonewall you. This buffing approach is way more up my alley because I feel like it keeps the spirit of Silverwolf alive and provides far more interesting gameplay opportunities. The suggested buffs I've heard on repeat, I feel only peel away restrictions that create natural advantages and disadvantages and make a more stale unit. I wanted to highlight these alternatives to buff her because they bring more attention to her lacking damage amp. That resistance point I mentioned and how it can be functionally useless. Meanwhile, when you look at characters like Ruan Mei, Robin, and Sparkle, each of them raises damage by 3 vectors. Overall damage buffs. For Robin and Sparkle specifically, attack and crit damage. Meanwhile, Ruan Mei's all-type respen enhances practically every single damage marker equally, while at the same time, her weakness break efficiency is buffing super break damage. Silverwolf is underwhelming because she is damage amping at a 4-star level. Hell, let's take a peek at Zhao Che. He is able to contribute to dot damage and mechanics by providing a dot. He's actively contributing to a playstyle, but he also buffs overall damage and ult damage, while at the same time being designed to cradle Acheron's entire kit. Silverwolf's 20% res down isn't a buff. It's only making your unit as strong as they should already be. Silverwolf brings you to a baseline. The other support characters are elevating. And ultimately, that's why I don't think Wolfie was really a strategy killer, because when we look at the broad impact of her kit, it's very minor. I feel like Silverwolf only seemed so overpowered at her release because she was the first 5-star support. All she really did was give players a taste of premium power amping and rule breaking, and let others use their favorite characters a little bit more freely. If you actually wanted to finger anybody for being that final nail, I'd look no further than Luo Cha, which isn't very far considering he was second phase in Silverwolf's patch. Believe it or not, I believe his ability to remove resource management via auto healing constitutes the first real reduction in strategic play. Luocha's automatic panic heal and giving a healing field would have created scenarios where you'd have more skill points than you otherwise should or would, and you have less reason to ask yourself if it's worth it to save that SP for your DPS or spend it so that your support doesn't die. And that is the first bit of premium convenience privilege that would become far more impactful in what players would view as vital to pull value. I mean, I doubt I'd have to enlighten anybody on the various discussions surrounding skill point positivity or negativity, how pulling a vertical limited, whether it be an LC or an Eidolon, was a serious consideration if it gave skill points. Some going so far as to say your 5-star absolutely needed it to be viable, despite the fact that it very often was not true. If you ask me, the real final nail in the coffin was obviously Ruan Mei. It's undeniably Ruan Mei, because she essentially rewrote the logic of making an actual Harmony unit. She was the first character designed to usher in an entire archetype and carry it on their back, while also being universally fantastic. She decimated the delicate SP balance by only having to manage her buff once every 3 turns, and had a game-changing buff that affected the tempo of the entire game and shut half of the fights down. But if you really were determined to pick someone before her, then honestly it was Hua Hua, who practically turned CC and debuffs on your teammates off as a concept. Half of Kafka's boss encounter just stops working if Hua Hua is on the team. Hell, it actively becomes beneficial to you since it's a free Bronya action advance. Freeze lost basically all power, and you needed a hard delay to get past Hua Hua's unlimited cleanse works. And you know, there were a lot of people who felt really dumb for listening to the Doom posters about Hua Hua. Now, I feel like I should level with you guys. I don't think or believe Silverwolf really did any damage to the strategy in this turn-based strategy game. And I feel like the buffs people want from her may be approaching this from the wrong side of things. I felt motivated to talk about this because I recognize that what I believe to be a misunderstanding of one of my favorite units was going about, and that got me interested to shoot my shot, as it were. So I feel like it would only be fair if I revealed that maybe I could recognize my own personal bias in this case. And it's the fact that Silverwolf was a character I leaned on heavily through the growing pains of my account. I wasn't clearing MOC because of her or anything like that. However, she helped me get through overworld encounters and many sim uni runs. And as a result, she was there through plenty of my initial story beats. I've had this character since patch 1.5 when I started playing, so a lot of my perspective is probably colored by my nostalgia for that early game experience, and I want to preserve the clunk that provided me with crushing lows before giving me the most soaring highs when it flipped back around. This is a character who's very near and dear to me. So maybe you can understand why I'm so firm in my beliefs and also know that I'm not coming at this just to be a contrarian. The buffs I talk about in this video, these suggestions, I should say, they to me sound a lot less like people trying to make the game better, but just saying what you think people want to hear. All of those buffs only serve to take X skill and make it stronger, not really taking into account what's actually deficient in the kit itself. I mean, again, claiming Silverwolf only had 5% more defense shred than Pela when it's 13, and all you'd have to do is read her kit to figure that out. I watched someone math out how that defense down increase would get her to 71% def reduction thanks to pearls, when she's already at 69, when you remember her talent exists. This guy's math would have had Silverwolf at 79, essentially 80% defense reduction. I don't mean to put intentions in the minds of people, but after I hear the same points enough times, it sounds less like analysis of the game and more like directly acquiescing to common complaints. True, maybe they were just saying the ultimate should be higher, But why would you not take that into account with her talent's defense down? You know, I really am just trying to impress upon you that I don't want to lose the character in her kit. I don't want Silverwolf to feel like a skin more than her own unique unit, because the restrictions that affect how you even built your team were just edited out in pursuit of a very bland viability. To me, the times I get to bust her out because I have a wacky idea like Bleed Hill or challenging myself by not using the meta supports is more fun than a character who has will function training wheels on. But hey, that's just my opinion. If you got your own, share it in the comments below. I'd love to talk it out and hopefully learn more insights. With that, this has been Warden, signing off.